Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Android users can find us and subscribe on your Play Music app. Apple users can find us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Stitcher. You can follow us on Spreaker. And you can find the podcast on jimmyhinton.org and findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so that we can spread the word. Let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast with host Jimmy Hinton.
And Jimmy's mom, Clara.
I feel like we should reverse that and have you introduce yourself first and then me, because ladies first, right?
We could do that. We
and age
next
before
week,
beauty, all that good stuff.
Oh, thanks, Jimmy.
Yeah.
We can do that. We can switch it up, okay? Next week.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. And this week, we're going to continue our talk on abuse in schools. And today's episode is the cost of abuse. I'll just read some statistics from a CDC study, that's Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The CDC did a study in 2012. I don't think that they've done one since then, but they followed the cost of kids who are abused. So the title of the article I'm reading from comes directly from the CDC website. I'll put a link to that in the description of this episode. And it's called Cost of Child Abuse and Neglect Rival Other Major Public Health Problems. And I'm just going to read, it's a short article, but I'm going to read some excerpts from this. Child maltreatment is a serious and preventative public health problem in the United States. In the fiscal year 2008, U.S. state and local child protective services received more than 3 million reports of children being abused or neglected, or about 6 complaints per minute every day. An estimated 772,000 children were classified by CPS authorities as being maltreated, and 1,740 children aged 0 to 17 died from abuse and neglect in 2008. Now, I'm curious whether those numbers have gone up since 2008. My guess is they're probably pretty similar to what they were in 2008. But the thing that I think is really staggering is there were 3 million reports that were made. Those are just reports of abuse.
Right.
That doesn't include the millions and millions and millions of kids that are abused that are never reported because people don't know. Think about, in our case, for over 40 years, abuse was going on and we didn't know it.
Right.
It was never reported in over 40 years. So the vast majority of abuse is never reported because people don't know what's going on.
It's staggering. It really is. When just thinking about there are 6 complaints per minute every day. Those, just that alone,
yeah.
I mean, it boggles our minds.
It's hard to wrap your mind around that.
Yeah,
those
it really
numbers.
is. It truly is. It's sobering and it's sad.
Well, we're talking about, abuse in schools because we talk about churches a lot and we don't really talk about schools, but we made the point last week, our kids spend more waking hours in school than they spend with us parents once they get out of school. And, they spend so many hours and hours at school for half a year, for 180 days they're at school. And it's pretty important that if they're going to be at school, we should work pretty hard to keep them safe while they're there. I follow the statistics on teacher abusers, and the statistics are getting really worse. And some people say, well, that's just because more people are reporting. And I don't think so. I think there are more abusive teachers that are entering the workforce, or at least that are getting caught more because technology leaves a digital print. A lot of these cases, I've studied 68 cases pretty closely, all school teachers, and out of those 68, it was well over 90% of them had done a lot of interaction with their students over social media, texting, certain apps where they're chatting back and forth, secretive apps, the Kick app, Snapchat, Facebook Messenger, on and on and on. And, these explicit messages start flying back and forth. That wasn't a problem 10 years ago. At least not like it is now. Now there's just so much access and pressure.
Right. Mm-hmm. And as I'm thinking, it's no wonder that these numbers have changed, and you're correct. There's easier access to do all kinds of things over social media and through technology, which we did not have in years past. And also, there was no proof before. Now, at least through technology, there's a bit of proof.
Right.
Am I making sense? Whereas before, teachers were really protected. It's the child's word against the teacher.
But I think two things have increased where proof, because of the digital imprint, has increased, so has access to our kids. That's increased as well, which is not a good thing. And I said when I did a training at our local school 2 days ago, I just did a full day, 7-hour training. I said, it's amazing to me in my 9-year-old daughter's class how many kids have phones. And they all looked at each other and were like, like all these little kids have phones. Our daughter is 9. She does not have a phone. She's begging us for a phone because all of her friends have phones and we won't give her one.
You better not, or I'm going to be on your case, James.
I know. You already text her enough. She doesn't have a phone, but she does have an app, and it's on she has a tablet, an Android device, and we got her a fake Google number, and she is able to text a very select group of people, Granny being one of them.
Thank you.
And I get a carbon copy on every single text that she sends and receives, and it's always funny because I can tell when she sneaks off to text you. She just absolutely adores you.
And I adore her. She's so cute. Yeah.
But, the problem is we've really increased access, and it's just such a problem now. It's a really, really big problem because it's so easy to get direct access to a child.
It is, and not all parents are like you, Jimmy, where they have the wherewithal to keep track of all this.
Yeah, but even if you do, it's still really hard. And
it is.
We really limit the time that our kids spend on devices. We don't put crazy restrictions on them, but we still monitor. Our kids don't know it, but we pull their devices, and we look and make sure that
you have to do that.
Nothing's going on in the history of their devices.
Right.
We also monitor and make sure we know which apps they're using. We also make them use their devices when they're in the same room with us.
I think that's a given. That has to be right.
I mean, they're not allowed to use their devices to sneak off and go use their devices. Eden tries, but
I think every child is going to test and try.
Yeah. But, my point is this. So many kids have personal cell phones that are completely unrestricted or close to being completely unrestricted. Right. And teachers are getting the numbers. And I think parents are surprised because, again, there's that level of naivety where it exists in the churches and it exists in the schools just the same, where they assume, hey, our school teachers they're professionals.
They're good people.
They're good people. Yeah. And when my kid goes to school, they're safe. Yeah, they're safe there.
Right.
When I drop them off, they're safe. And the biggest thing I need to worry about is somebody walking in and shooting up at school. Mm-hmm. And I made the point, statistically speaking, when I spoke to this group on Monday, I said, statistically speaking, our kids will never experience a school shooting in their lifetime. Right. I mean, it's not that it doesn't happen. Right. It absolutely happens. But statistically speaking, the chances of my kids experiencing a shooter coming into the school It's not going to happen in their lifetime
Next to
statistically.
nil. Right. Yes.
Whereas an abuser, I could name off the top of my head in the last 10 years, 5 different abusers who were staffed at the school. And in fact, our school district just in late 2018 settled a $5 million federal lawsuit for sexual abuse with one of the students. This happens all the time. And it's not just our school district. I could go to every single school district in our county and start pulling up stories that have happened within the last 5 years. Every one of them.
Right.
Every single one of them. All of them. 100% of them.
I know.
So that is happening. So what's the cost of that? And if we look at that and just look at it from a numbers perspective, and sadly, some people only speak numbers because you talk to them and you plead with them about your kid's safety, and they're like, oh, well, your kids are safe here. We're taking preventative measures. You'll hear that a lot at churches and schools. Oh, well, we have a code of conduct, or we do a training once a year for our teachers and pull them together and talk about appropriate versus inappropriate behaviors for the teachers. And I'm like, that's not a preventative measure. That's not.
No.
You're going to have predators who are mixed into that group, who are yawning and thinking this is pathetic. Like they actually think they're going to keep me from abusing kids.
I think the word you used a few paragraphs back in talking, we are naive as parents. We're very naive to think that our children are surrounded by safety with all of the teachers. We're very
we can never be assuming.
Naive. No, not at all.
We can never just assume that because our kids go somewhere that they're safe. I thrive on statistics because statistics are really important. Now, I don't reduce abuse to statistics because every single kid who's abused is a person. Right. That's a soul. That's a person. It's horrific. I hear horrific stories every single day of my life, 7 days a week. I hear the most inhumane things that a human being can even think of who are doing it to these little kids. So I want to make that point. These are not just statistics, but statistics are incredibly important because they paint a picture. And the statistics right now in schools, for example, the state of Texas saw an increase of, I think I'm pretty sure it's 36% between the 2016 school year and 2017 in teachers that were arrested in the state of Texas.
That's huge, by the way.
A 36% increase.
Huge jump.
Pennsylvania saw a similar increase. It wasn't quite that big, but it was pretty close. It was in the double digits. We're seeing this big uptick in teachers that are getting busted for abuse. And so we know it's happening. We know they're being arrested. We know that they're being fired and sent to prison, a lot of them. So the question is, what's the response on the training end of things? And I can tell you what it is.
We're waiting to hear, Jimmy.
Yeah, you're going to wait a lot longer because it's nothing. It's nada.
Yeah, I knew you'd say that.
We're not doing anything to increase and improve the training. It's all the same mandated reporting, training. You're a mandated reporter. After abuse has already happened, you're reported to Pennsylvania Childline, PA Childline.
Which is so overburdened right now.
Sure.
Your chances of getting a valid response are next to nil.
Right.
Yeah.
So what's going to end up happening is you're filing these reports after the fact.
Right. And they're going
so don't even think about calling that prevention because that's not prevention. But we do. Our legislatures, they're notorious for calling that prevention. We're taking abuse prevention seriously. No, we're not. If we were, we'd start reducing those numbers and we'd start having programs in the school. And I know from training our school district personally and asking very specific questions that they know very little about prevention and about what protocols are in place. We're going to be interviewing Laura Dunn about Title IX and how that applies to schools and what that looks like in practice. She was not available to interview this week, so that'll be next week. And I'm looking forward to that in a big way because Title IX is really important. But I asked the question when I was at the school. I said, who is your Title IX coordinator at my kid's school district? And everybody looked at each other and not one person knew. And one lady sheepishly raised her hand, and I said, go ahead and ask it. You can ask anything. Yeah. Like, I didn't know the first thing about Title IX until I met Laura Dunn. I didn't know that Title IX applied to schools. I had no idea. It's like the best kept secret. I had no idea. And so she raised her hand and she said, what is Title IX? I don't even know what it is. And our schools are required by law. They're under Title IX law. And they don't even know what Title IX is. That's, again, not picking on them because I didn't know. I'm still just starting to learn what it is, and that's part of why we're having Laura Dunn talk, because I want to know exactly what it is and how we apply that to training in schools and how we apply that to prevention.
Life has changed dramatically for everyone, both in the schools and in the homes, and by means of communication. As parents, it is very easy to hand a kid a device, as we call them, and just say, entertain yourself. I'm busy. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. I'm exhausted here.
Yeah.
And we lose touch with that child. And the same happens in school. They are on computers. Yeah, they're monitored and all of that, but they're actually being taught how to use the devices.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that.
Right.
They are being taught from kindergarten on up.
Yeah.
We have.
I was surprised with my kids when they come home because they don't tell us parents that.
Right.
And they had them, they had our daughter, how many years? That was probably 2 years ago at least. And she's only in 4th grade. So she would have been in 1st or 2nd grade. And they had them using Twitter. And I was like, what?
Now,
like, they're teaching them how to use social media.
Okay, now think about this as being a parent from back in the dark ages. I didn't have to worry about that at all with you kids because it just was non-existent. But now our children are actually being taught how to communicate through social media at a very young age, and the family itself has fragmented so badly because of a number of things, and we won't get into that, but we don't talk to our children like we used to.
Mm-mm.
You all do, your family does, but the majority of families do not. There's no more sitting down to dinner and talking, how was your day? Tell us one good thing about what happened today. There's not that communication.
Mm-mm.
And we communicate even by texting with our children.
Mm-hmm.
And we have lost the
connection.
That connection where a child can feel like they can come to you also. If something it goes wrong in school or with a teacher, I don't think a child has that safety, that hook, that connection to mom and dad that they used to have before.
We're seeing a trend too.
Wow.
I'm sure this could be replicated nationwide. But I know locally, just from talking to all kinds of educators, the huge jump in mental and behavioral problems within the youth is staggering.
Yeah, it is.
We have a large percentage of kids with severe mental and behavioral issues that didn't exist 6 years ago.
Well, anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, all of those things. And we need to really research what's going on with our youth. Why are there so many young suicides, 10, 11 years old now? Really? What's happened? What's going on?
Yeah.
So I think we're going to find that there is a big breach of communication in every aspect of our children's lives. Didn't mean to throw you off course there with the cost of abuse.
Yeah, well, no. I mean, I think it's really good to discuss this because that's all included. Like these kids have TSSs, and I never remember what that stands for, but the TSSs are one-on-one with troubled students. So
right. It's the
whether
aid,
it's mental,
they're aides
right,
that sit with them.
So whether it's
all day.
mental disabilities or severe behavioral problems, they have to be assigned a personal TSS. The number of TSSs at my wife's place of work, where she teaches preschool, outnumbers the number of employees that they have at the preschool.
Yeah.
So they have more student aides who are working one-on-one with the kids than they have regular employees. That was not the case when she started working there.
Just a few years ago.
7 years
actually.
ago, or
yeah.
however long
Sure.
it was. It was 8 years ago. That was not the case.
No.
They had maybe 2 TSSs for the entire place. And now, I mean, when I walk in, I show up to pick up our youngest right before the bus, because the bus stop is actually there at where he goes to preschool. And I pick up the other 2 kids there. So when I pick them up, there's a line on both sides of the hall of TSSs, and each one has 1 student.
Yep.
A whole line of them.
We have a very, very fractured lives.
Yeah.
Fractured
I mean, that was
lives,
never
yes.
the case before.
No.
So, there's a cost to this, an economic cost, in addition to the spiritual cost and the emotional cost and everything else. I mean, this is a lifetime. Once a kid has been abused once, it's a lifetime sentence, to use your word. It's a lifelong sentence. So here, the CDC study from 2012, it says the lifetime cost for each victim of child maltreatment who lived was $210,012, which is comparable to other costly health conditions, such as stroke, with a lifetime cost per person estimated at $159,846, or type 2 diabetes, which is estimated between $181,000 and $253,000. So child maltreatment, just for one case, if they follow that child through the rest of their life, it's a price tag of $210,012. And that includes things like doctor's visits, counseling, trauma therapy, and all this stuff that these kids have to go through, medication for anxiety, depression, chronic illnesses that they develop, loss of work because of depression, and just all the problems that are associated with trauma. $210,012 per victim.
And that's where we can put a monetary cost to that. But that's minimal, Jimmy, I think, in comparison to the spiritual and the moral cost of each child. And it's, to me, that's heartbreaking, because when a child is traumatized by abuse, and that is trauma, I don't care how you try to cut it or slice it or whatever, when a child is abused, there is such havoc, there is such heartbreak, there is such trauma that we can't put a cost to it. It affects everything for the rest of life. It really, really does.
Yeah.
And it takes intense therapy to learn how to live within the confines of that trauma. And some people do, some people don't. Some people have access, by the way, to therapy. Some don't. The majority of people do not have access to that kind of help. And to me, that's heartbreaking. It really, really is. I've laid awake at nights many times thinking about this and why our churches are shrinking, why faith is like it is, why there's such a lack of belief in God, a good God, a God who cares. And when you look at the whole abuse cycle, you can begin to understand how the disintegration has come about.
Well, and I just, I can't reveal personal details, obviously, but I just consulted with 2 different groups of people just this week, one today and one yesterday. And both involved cases of abuse at churches, and both involved churches knowing about the abuse and getting angry, not that kids were abused, but that people were bringing it to the attention of the leadership.
It just blows my mind.
That's what they were angry with.
Yeah,
and in fact,
it's still going on.
That this is not uncommon. If this were just 2 that kind of cropped up, that'd be bad enough. But this is the norm, and it's the norm in schools. Schools are still not equipped to be able to handle it. Then last week we talked about, the powerful teachers unions and all these other groups that get in the way. And, they always fall back on HIPAA laws. Well, because of HIPAA laws, we're not allowed to talk about this. So, keep this a secret. Don't let parents know. Well, that's why it's going to be fun to talk to Laura Dunn.
It is.
You like that little rhyme there?
That was great. Yes.
It's going to be fun to talk to Laura because Title IX requires parents to be informed, regardless of whether the abuser, whether it's bullying or sexual harassment or whatever the abuse is. If it's a student who's causing the abuse, it doesn't matter. Title IX still requires you, from my understanding, it still requires the school to name that person by name to the parents and say, here's our course of corrective action and what we're going to do to rectify this situation. That's not being done in schools. Schools don't even know. They don't know who the Title IX coordinators are, and they don't even know what Title IX is.
Well, I'm sure you will hear, or you did hear, even from your workshop on Monday, teachers will say we're overworked. The majority of problems we're dealing with on a daily basis has escalated. We are expected to be parent models when we should not be. We're here to teach, not to be in the role of a guiding parent. And, on and on and on it goes. And besides all of that, this whole thing of reporting, you'll hear, is messy. It means a lot of people have to get involved, which takes up time and money and resources. And the easy way is to just make it go away.
Yeah.
Well,
the one thing they said, they said too, is that they would love it if somebody was there to take this burden, because right now it's up to the teachers to handle this.
And it's almost
too much.
It really is.
Bullying and all that stuff. Like that's all on the teacher. That all falls on their shoulders.
Tough. It's really, really tough.
Yeah.
Because as the problems of the students have escalated, that's a bigger burden being placed on the teachers. And in the meantime, you have teachers among the teachers who are the wolves going around with very easy access to these children.
Absolutely. And, we'll kind of wrap up with this point, but I had made this point at the training that some of these kids who are being abused in school by teachers are likely being abused at home. But even if they're not, doesn't matter. The point is this: they come to school, and if they're being abused at home, then they come to school and they're being abused by a teacher. Where do they go?
It's horrific.
They can't get away from it. There is no refuge anywhere that they go. And when people are not aware of that, or they don't step in to defend that child, it wrecks their lives. Forever. It does. Yes. So if they're not being abused at home, but they are being abused at school, again, here's the same problem. Where do they go? And we're not teaching our kids, we're not training our kids to know who they can talk to, because if we're just training them to go talk to their teacher and their teacher's the one abusing them, where do they go?
Right. And I think Jimmy and I were talking prior to taping this podcast the education has to begin. It has to be with our children also. It absolutely has to be with them.
Yeah, we need to train not just staff, but our kids as well. And we're going to work hard for that. We're going to talk about that in the next couple episodes as we focus on schools. We are going to talk about solutions. We're not there yet. This is just kind of laying out the problem. But the last episodes on the school are going to be they're going to be focused on what we do about it, both as parents and as educators. What do we do about it, and how do we better train both ourselves and our students to defend against abuse and to get rid of these people? We need to get rid of them.
Right.
Absolutely get rid of them. Send them to prison. If we can't send them to prison, then
get them
send
out
them
of our schools.
somewhere. Get rid of them.
Right. Yes.
Get them gone.
Yes, absolutely.
They're causing a lot of damage. There is a price that comes with abuse. Our truth bomb for the day is there's a price that comes with abuse. It comes with a heavy, heavy, heavy price. So we have got to take prevention seriously, and we've got to be talking about preventing abuse in our schools. Thank you for tuning in this week. We'll catch you next episode.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast. Thank you to our patrons who make this podcast possible. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker, subscribe on Google Play Music, Apple Podcast, or Stitcher. If you believe in what we do, consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron, and check out the cool rewards our patrons receive. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.